Iridescent Adolescent by Phoebe Roy, from the short stories anthology Iridescent Adolescent by the English and Media Centre. After working for a short time in academic publishing, Phoebe Roy decided to focus on writing. Iridescent Adolescent was selected for inclusion in A Change Is Gonna Come, an anthology of stories for young adults that gives creative space to those who have historically had their thoughts, ideas, and experiences oppressed. Iridescent Adolescent. When the first feather came, 2 months after her 13th birthday, Natalie plucked it out and laid it in the treasure box she kept on the big dresser in her bedroom. The box was made of silky dark wood, and apart from the feather, it contained 4 things. She had a little velvet bag with her baby teeth inside that she had kept because she used to think she might be able to do a spell with them. And she had one photograph from her parents' wedding that had Mazel Tov, Carmel, and Arnab written across the bottom in pink cursive letters. She also had the note Josh Franklin had written wishing her a happy birthday. And finally, she had the necklace, a gift from her great-aunt, Aunt Afia, in America. The feather was only about 5 centimeters long, and in dim light, its veins looked brown. But when the sun bounced off it, it shone bronze. The necklace from her great-aunt wasn't really the sort of thing she'd buy for herself. It was gold and filigreed, with a gem at the centre. If you looked closely, you could see that what appeared to be a pattern of twisted twigs clawed around the gem was actually a tangle of clasped skeletal hands and wings. It made her feel peculiar when she looked at it, and the stone winked and warmed in her hand as she cupped it there. When Carmel saw it, she'd raised her eyebrows and opened her mouth as if she were about to speak, but then shook her head and said nothing. The feather lay next to the note from Josh Franklin, sparkling slightly as if it knew something. At first, the tiny dent it had left just below her collarbone had bled, but it soon healed. After the first feathers appeared, Natalie began to wake early and ravenous and would creep downstairs to get something to eat. Once her mother caught her cramming entire sheets of smoked salmon into her mouth while clutching a box of laddus under one arm. She caught the air-bathed smell of her skin whenever she moved, freshly mineral and greenly salty, as if she'd been out all night running through the trees. Her curls screamed down her back, and there were new feathers every day. Now she only plucked out the ones that could be seen. When she got out of the bath, she turned to face away from the mirror and twisted to see the line of bronze marching down her spine. They lay flat and almost invisible during the day, apart from when something angered her, at which she could feel the feathers standing up. At night, though, they unfurled and rippled when she sat cross-legged and solemn in front of her bedroom mirror. She thought about the sea all the time and took the note from Josh out of her treasure box and slept with it rolled up tightly and clutched in her palm. The hunger was new because Natalie used to have to be coaxed to eat. When she was 7, her parents had become so worried by it that they spent long hours trying to come up with a way to persuade her to try different food. Carmel shared her concern with her mother, who suggested that they start sending Natalie to shul on festivals, where there would be lots of different foods for her to try, away from the watchful and anxious eyes of her parents. It's time she started taking an interest in her heritage anyway, said Arnab. Carmel then suggested that it would be nice for Natalie to go to the temple with her cousins on her father's side. She was given delicious things, spiced potatoes and pastries, balls of dough covered in sugar, miniature squares of matzo with a smear of cream cheese and little flutes of salmon. And she would light candles and sing songs with her cousins and aunties and uncles. She thought about how lucky she was to be such a pretty shade of gold, belonging with all of them, but different enough that she seemed her own invention. Still, she barely ate. She felt oppressed by how solid her bones seemed, and kept a collection of fairy pictures, which she looked at every evening under her duvet with a torch. She longed for hollowness. The same year, her mother asked her how she would like to go and stay with her auntie Afia in California for the summer. She knew Afia was an artist and lived in a house on stilts at the edge of a forest of coastal redwoods. She knew the stream that flowed outside was clean enough to drink from, and that you could see deer and mountain lions out of the wraparound glass windows. She nodded her head eagerly and looked forward to her adventure. Her father took her shopping to buy her own special suitcase and a pink leather wallet to put her passport in. She brandished both these items proudly at the flight attendant, who seated her next to a friendly woman. She thought she would be afraid of the plane, but she soon found her strongest feeling was boredom. So she got out of her seat and began to lope up and down the aisles, sending moody looks in either direction. She felt someone gently touch her arm, and she looked down at the hand first, then up at its owner. It was a kind-looking man who asked where her mother and father were. She raised her eyes to his, and his smile died. He gulped and looked away. She felt a strange heat behind her eyeballs, as if they were burning. She continued her prowling. At first, staying at Auntie Afia's felt strange. There were no set meals or bedtimes, not like at home. Her great-aunt seemed to have countless friends and colleagues who appeared sometime in the morning and stayed late into the night. They talked about politics and art and history, but they also talked about what they'd been watching on TV and had friendly rows about which of them would be the most used after an apocalypse. Some of these people were over 80 years old, which to Natalie may as well have been 1,000. They had all survived apocalypses. They came and went in shifts, and their voices filled the house. They pinched Natalie's cheeks and called her a shiner Madeleine. One man asked loudly if this was the Schwarz's child. There was a silence. Then Afia ordered him out, explaining afterwards that he had not been invited. The sea lived in the house's corners and in Afia's paintings. The canvas she was working on covered the whole of one wall in the studio and showed a cliff in cross-section, so detailed that it made Natalie's eyes hurt to look at it too closely. In the morning, when her great-aunt came to wake her, she would bring with her a thick salt air, and Natalie could see damp prints on the stairs. They weren't shaped like human feet, but Natalie couldn't tell exactly what they were. When she left, her great-aunt hugged her tightly, dropped one kiss on her forehead, and gave her a tiny turquoise egg, flecked with little gold splashes. Natalie asked if her aunt had painted it because she had never seen such depth and purity of colour in nature. Afia hesitated before saying that she had. Years after the summer in California, Arnab suggested it would be nice to go on a trip for Natalie's 12th birthday, which was in March and that year fell on a Saturday. They decided on Brighton because it was the closest to home and because there were cousins they could visit on the way back. As soon as they came within sight of the coast, Natalie felt like jumping out of the car and tearing down to the beach. She kept herself still by wrapping both arms around her ribcage and tried not to picture herself running into the waves, the foam hissing round her ankles. Carmel didn't say much that day, but she kept glancing at the water, leaving Arnab to keep up the conversation. "Do you fancy a dip, Betty?" he asked, when they were installed in a cafe full of wrought iron furniture, painted white and with a single rose in a slim glass vase on each table. Natalie looked up with an eager expression, but then caught the twinkle in his eye and realised he'd been teasing. But her mother spoke up. "I'd like a dip, John," she said. Natalie's father laughed and said that both his girls were tougher than him. Then he bet Carmel that she wouldn't have the nerve, calling her bubbler, as he always did. Carmel shook her husband's hand and laughed, because she was like her own father and never turned down a bet. Arnab and Natalie joined in the laughter, but then Natalie saw an air of expectancy settle over her mother. As soon as the bill came, she leaped to her feet. "Come on, Betty, she said, taking Natalie's hand. She began to hurry down to the beach. They tore off their shoes and socks and ran toward the water, squealing when the chill pebbles touched their toes. Arnaud got out his camera and took shot after shot of Natalie and Carmel, hand in hand and ankle deep in the surf, the waves clinging to their skin like little white lace-frilled socks. In profile, Carmel looked fierce. It was only when she faced you that she appeared softer and prettier. Natalie had inherited her mother's sharp jawline and Arnab's Roman nose, but her dark red curls were a mystery to them both. A breeze whipped up their hair, and anyone watching closely would have seen the neat necklace of little red dots on the nape of her mother's neck, and the tiny turquoise point piercing through the skin under her right ear, just for a moment, before she lifted a hand and smoothed her hair back down. 6 months after Natalie's 13th birthday, a phone rang in a glass house on stilts at the Forest in California, interrupting Afia's morning painting. Normally, she would leave it to ring because she liked to make the most of the dawn light. But whoever it was kept hanging up and redialing. In the end, she balanced her brush on the edge of a jar of murky green water and went to answer it. "You said it wouldn't happen to her," said Carmel, not bothering with a greeting. You knew it would when you promised it wouldn't." "No," said Afia carefully. "I didn't promise. I said we had no way of knowing until she was older." "Then why did you send her the necklace?" Carmel asked. Afia could picture Carmel breathing out of her nostrils as she always did when annoyed, like a bull. "It's just a necklace," said Afia gently. Carmel was silent for a moment or two, then said, "Her feathers are a different colour to ours." "Are they? What colour?" "They're a sort of bronze." Afia was silent for a moment. Then she said, "How fascinating. Did you know for Homer, blue and bronze were interchangeable? The Iliad is full of references to the bronze sky, so I wonder if I destroyed the necklace, do you think it would reverse the process?" "Oh, darling, now why would you want to do a thing like that? She's part of a wonderful tradition. She has sisters all over the world." Carmel swallowed the lump that had appeared in her throat. "I don't want her to be different," she admitted. "Caramel," said her aunt gently, using her childhood nickname. "She's already different." From time to time, Natalie would take the necklace out of her treasure box and put it on. The gem changed colour in different lights, and Natalie was surprised to find that of the few people she trusted enough to show it to, her mother saw it as blue, she saw it as bronze, and her best friend Chloe and her father both thought it was entirely clear, like a piece of quartz. Her great aunt sent her a parcel, as she often did, and when Natalie opened it, a peacock feather and a pastel sketch of a peacock fell out. "My darling Natty," it read, "please find enclosed some little curiosities for your treasure box. I know some people think peacock feathers are unlucky, but they're so beautiful that I'm prepared to risk it. I do hope you feel the same. They're fascinating creatures, peacocks, and the quality of their feathers even more so. Their pigment is brown, but the structural arrangement of the feathers' veins, those are the pointy bits, make them appear that iridescent colour. Isn't that wonderful? The way they look is down to what they essentially and objectively are. Nothing so pedestrian as pigmentation. Just a little tidbit for you, darling. Kisses to Mum and Dad, as always." Natalie folded up the letter and ran her thumb and forefinger over its folds until they were sharp enough to cut her. She set it down, then held up the peacock feather to one she had pulled from just under her ear, a tiny one, no larger than the joint of her little finger. Turning them over side by side, she could see no link between them. She shrugged and put them both in the box. One night, Carmel and Arnab were lying in bed. Arnab was lying flat on his back, with his hands clasped behind his neck. His head was turned slightly to the right, as if he was staring at the vase of dwarf roses on the bedside table. "We should stop locking the doors at night," he said. Carmel marked her place with her finger and looked over at him. "For Natalie," he continued, "if she's going to start needing to go out every evening." "How did you know?" asked Carmel after a pause. Arnab shrugged. almost imperceptibly. "She's started to smell just like you," he said, "and she's always hungry. I worry about her trying to come in through the window." "We could give her a key," said Carmel, still watching him. "That's a good idea. She could wear it on the necklace if she started wearing it more," he said. He reached up and kissed Carmel on the cheek. Then he crescent mooned himself up on his left side and closed his eyes. Almost instantly, he fell asleep. 1,000 years ago, 4 winged figures stood on the edge of a cliff at sunrise. The cliff overlooked a valley, holding 2 vast lakes, one on the eastern boundary and one on the west. The cliff was banded with rock running in pale red and rose veins, and the rising sun turned the bands to flame. The figures were still, but their wings were outstretched and poised, like drawn swords, and each stood over 6 feet tall. If you were up on the cliff top with them, you would also have seen a 5th, much smaller being, a human child sitting nearby with her knees drawn up. Calm rolled off the child, and she showed no fear, even as the creatures turned to her, each holding out a jeweled cup. She took each cup and drank deeply. Then she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Carmel and Arnab announced they would all be going to see Aunt Afia over the Easter holidays to celebrate Natalie's 15th birthday. Natalie was furious at how much fun she'd miss, and her outrage only increased when her parents replied that nothing so important could possibly happen in just a week. Natalie locked herself in her room, but finally emerged, pouting, sometime later. She grudgingly admitted she was looking forward to seeing her great aunt again. Afia greeted them warmly, with a strange sparkle at the corner of each eye, and immediately set about installing them in the house, which was just as Natalie remembered it. The endless visitors still came, some bringing with them boys of about her age. As soon as she saw them, she feigned lack of interest and sat herself in their midst reading magazines. On the last night of their holiday, Arnab woke suddenly to a faintly metallic smell and a sound like faraway chimes. Even though the curtains were closed, the room was full of flat silver light, ironing the perspective from the furniture, and Carmel was nowhere to be seen. Drawing the curtains, he saw a full moon hanging watchfully in the sky, as if it expected to be caught in a long-handled net, its craters standing in relief, giving it the look of a great glowing marble. The chimes grew louder, and he stumbled out of the house, jamming on his shoes as he did so. He could feel his heart high up in his chest as he reached the beach. The sea was molten mercury in the moonlight, the waves crashing down like fistfuls of coins, rudely loud amid the silent night air. Arnab dropped down onto the sand as white as unbleached bones and sat watching the water while he waited. He didn't have to wait long before one of the waves, turned by the dark into a slab of black jelly, was pierced by a creature bursting through its surface, a feathered turquoise blade with its wings folded behind it. It dived back under the next wave and disappeared. Next came another, also turquoise, which also dived back under the water. And then a third, bronze, which rose high into the sky and spread its wings, silhouetted against the moon. It threw back its head and made 3 harsh cries. Goose pimples shot through him as the figure beat its wings, once, twice, then folded them behind its shoulders and shot back down into the water, which closed over it like a medal dropped in ink. Even the waves seemed to quiet then, their scalloped edges nudging gently at the sand. Arnab smiled.